Hey everyone, I'm your author June. Before we get started, I really would appreciate it if everyone could hit the subscribe button. It helps me grow the channel, and I would love for all of you to come on this journey with me, as a family. Now, let's get into the story. Let me know if you enjoy. Dust devils danced around her arrival, clinging to her well-worn riding skirt and dulling the sheen of her chestnut hair. Rosalie DeWitt. The name tasted of danger, like a flintlock primed and ready. She held herself erect upon the saddle, her gaze skimming the dilapidated buildings of Redemption, a fleeting smile gracing her lips. It never quite reached eyes that were the color of gunmetal, sharp and calculating. From the sheriff's office window, Boone watched, the badge on his chest catching the sun's glare. He'd seen all manner of souls wash through Redemption, lured by silver claims and the promise of reinvention. But this woman, she radiated a different aura, a coiled tension, a guardedness that hinted at a life lived in transit. Boone knew Trouble intimately, and Trouble had just ridden into town on a sweat-slicked mare. He observed her dismount before Martha's saloon, the town's only respectable establishment. The townsfolk, momentarily stilled, began to stir with renewed interest. Murmurs spread through the onlookers like a prairie fire. He noted the lingering glances of the men, the narrowed gazes of the women. Rosalie seemed untouched, perhaps oblivious by the scrutiny. Her movements possessed direction, her posture proud, her shoulders set. Boone turned from the glass, unease twisting in his gut. A premonition settled over him. Redemption, already unstable, was about to topple. Inside Martha's, the piano player stumbled, his melody dissolving into a discordant jumble. The saloon, typically a boisterous symphony of guffaws and tinkling glass, descended into strained quiet. Martha Hayes, a formidable woman with a compassionate spirit, wiped the counter, her attention riveted on Rosalie. "Can I help you, miss?" Martha inquired, her tone measured. Rosalie leaned against the bar, her gaze cataloging the room's occupants. "Whiskey," she stated, her voice a low rasp. "And a room, if available." Martha poured the drink, her eyes never straying from Rosalie's features. "Rooms we have," she replied, "though then nothing grand." Rosalie took a generous swallow of the whiskey, the liquor's heat mirroring the intensity in her gaze. "I've endured worse," she remarked, setting the glass down with a soft click. The whispering commenced then, low conversations that scurried about the room like startled mice. "Did you see those eyes?" someone breathed. "As cold as Riverstone." "Heard she's been evicted from 3 towns already," another voice hissed. "She's a walking storm." Martha leveled a sharp look at the source of the murmurs, but it did little to stem the rising tide of suspicion. She understood how rumors could fester in a community like Redemption, how easily a person could face judgment and condemnation without justice. "Don't mind them," Martha advised, her voice gentling. "Folks here leap to conclusions." Rosalie chuckled, a mirthless sound. "I'm accustomed to it," she said. "Seems wherever I alight, trouble follows." "Or perhaps you're leading the dance," Martha retorted, softening her tone at once. She glimpsed something in Rosalie's eyes, a flash of suffering beneath the hardened exterior. Rosalie glanced away, toward the dusty street. "Perhaps," she conceded, her voice almost lost. Boone entered the saloon, his arrival instantly quieting the hum of conversation. He approached the bar, his boots marking the wooden floor. He nodded to Martha, then addressed Rosalie. "Afternoon, ma'am," he greeted, his voice deep and unwavering. "Sheriff Boone Mathers." Rosalie turned, her gaze unwavering. Rosalie DeWitt, she returned, her voice even and collected. Welcome to redemption, Boone stated, his eyes searching hers. I trust you find what you seek. I invariably do, Rosalie replied, a hint of defiance lacing her words. Boone maintained her gaze for a beat, the silence charged with unspoken meanings. He sensed that whatever Rosalie DeWitt sought, it would embroil his town in turmoil. And he knew, with a certainty that settled like lead in his stomach, that he would be caught in its vortex. Room 6, Martha announced, slicing through the tension. She slid a key across the counter to Rosalie. Supper's at 7. Rosalie pocketed the key, her eyes still locked on Boone. Thank you, she said, turning and descending the stairs, her boots tapping against the aged wood. Boone watched her retreat, his mind reeling. He knew he should distance himself, that she spelled nothing but tribulation, yet something about her, some shadowed depth in her eyes, beckoned him closer. A vulnerability she fiercely masked, a resilience that shone through her carefully constructed veneer. He sighed, raking a hand through his hair. He sensed his life, already complex, was about to become dramatically more so, and infinitely more perilous. Martha watched him, concern creasing her brow. She's a walking tempest, Boone, she stated, her voice hushed. I feel it in my bones. I know, Boone said, his gaze still fixed on the landing. But sometimes tempests seek you out, whether you invite them or not. He swallowed his whiskey, the taste acrid. He knew he should investigate her, unearth her secrets. Yet something restrained him, a reluctance to extinguish the fragile spark of hope he glimpsed within her. He knew it was folly. He knew he was flirting with disaster, but he couldn't resist. He was drawn to her, a moth to a scorching flame. And he recognized, with a sinking heart, that he was destined to be burned. As dusk settled, painting the sky with vibrant washes of fire and violet, Boone found himself standing before Room 6. He rationalized it as a mere welfare check, ensuring she wasn't inciting unrest. But he recognized the deceit. He yearned to see her again, to converse with her, to decipher the enigma she presented. He raised a hand to knock, then faltered. What was he doing? He was the law, not a love-sick fool. He should be restraining her, not courting her. He lowered his hand, starting to turn away. But then a sound drifted from within the room, a stifled sob, quickly suppressed. He froze, his heart aching. He couldn't disregard it. He knocked, his knuckles tapping softly against the door. "Rosalie?" he asked, his voice low and concerned. A long pause ensued, then the sound of approaching footsteps. The door creaked open, and Rosalie stood before him, her eyes ringed with red. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice a thread. Boone scrutinized her, his resolve crumbling. He saw the anguish in her gaze, the vulnerability she struggled to conceal. And he knew, in that instant, that he couldn't abandon her. "I merely wanted to ensure you were all right," he said, his voice gentle. Rosalie looked at him, her expression softening marginally. "Thank you," she said. "I appreciate it." She stepped back, gesturing him inside. "Come in," she offered. "I could use the company." Boone hesitated, then crossed the threshold. The room was modest, sparsely furnished, but clean. A single lamp cast a soothing warmth, illuminating Rosalie's face. He settled on the edge of the bed, his eyes fixed on her. "What troubles you?" he inquired. Rosalie sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's nothing," she said. "Just echoes of the past." "Everyone carries burdens," Boone stated. "It's how we shoulder them that defines us." Rosalie looked at him, her eyes probing. "Do you?" she asked. "Carry burdens, I mean?" Boone nodded, his gaze hardening. "More than I care to recall," he said. Silence descended, punctuated only by the lamp's quiet crackle. Boone sensed the tension in the room, the unspoken truths hanging heavy in the air. He knew Rosalie harbored a secret, a substantial one, and he was determined to unearth it, regardless of the sacrifice. "Why did you choose redemption?" he asked, his voice soft. Rosalie averted her gaze, her eyes darkening. "I needed sanctuary," she confessed. "From what?" Boone pressed gently. Rosalie hesitated, then inhaled deeply. "From a multitude of things," she replied. "From those who would harm me, from a history I cannot outrun." Boone reached out, taking her hand in his. Her skin was soft, but her grasp was strong. "You need not fear any longer," he said. "I am here to safeguard you." Rosalie looked at him, her eyes filled with disbelief. "You barely know me," she said. "Why would you extend your protection?" "Because I believe in you," Boone said. "I believe you're not the person they perceive you to be." Rosalie's eyes welled with tears. "You're mistaken," she said. "I am." Boone squeezed her hand, his heart aching for her. He understood that she was scarred, that she had erred, but he also recognized the goodness within her, the flicker of hope that refused to be extinguished. "I disagree," he said. "I believe you are merely lost, and I intend to assist you in finding your way back." Rosalie looked at him, her eyes reflecting a fragile mix of hope and skepticism. "It's beyond my reach," she said. "It's too late for me." "It's never beyond repair," Boone said, his voice resolute. "While breath remains, opportunity persists." He leaned closer, his gaze unwavering. "Trust me, Rosalie," he urged. "Allow me to assist you." Rosalie searched his eyes, seeking any trace of deception. She found only sincerity, only empathy. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt a flicker of optimism. She nodded, her voice barely audible. "All right," she said. Accusations in the air. The air in Redemption's church felt heavy, not with sacredness, but with a palpable blend of suspicion and simmering ire. The pews groaned beneath the weight of hunched figures, eyes laser-focused on Rosalie near the altar, fragmented rainbows from the stained glass dappling her ashen complexion. Martha stood sentinel beside her, a sturdy bulwark against a reed, her expression daring anyone to make a move against the younger woman. Boone, positioned by the entrance, scanned the room, recognizing the festering resentment, the fear masquerading as moral outrage. A familiar demon in Redemption, one he'd grappled with before. But tonight it held a different edge, sharper, inflamed by something deeper than distrust of an outsider. Cyrus Thorne, unsurprisingly, was the epicenter. Ensconced in the front pew, his massive form radiated an unnerving tranquility. His voice, a deep, resonant growl, permeated the sanctuary. "We all know why we're gathered. This woman," he waved a hand dismissively at Rosalie, "drifted into our town armed with a pretty facade and a cache of fabrications. Tales are spreading, tales of fleeced businesses, broken pledges, and men financially ruined in the aftermath. A wave of murmurs spread through the prowl. Congregation." Boone noticed Sarah Jenkins, her face taut with disapproval, nodding curtly. Old man Hemlock, usually dozing, sat bolt upright, suspicion gleaming in his eyes. Fear, a virulent disease, was taking hold. "I've heard these rumors too," Martha countered, her voice slicing through the rising tide of discontent. "Heard them filtered through several tongues, distorted and exaggerated with each retelling. Has anyone here actually suffered at Miss DeWitt's hand? Has anyone witnessed proof of these supposed transgressions?" The heavy silence descended. Thorne's lips curled into a knowing smirk. "Proof? Her very presence is the proof, Martha. The insidious way she worms her way into your trust, promising the world and delivering nothing but despair. Whispers drift down from the north of a trail of shattered romances and emptied coffers left in her wake." "That's enough, Thorne," Boone's voice resonated, amplified by the sudden quiet. He moved forward, the sound of his boots sharp against the wooden floor. "Accusations without foundation are nothing but hot air. This is still America, and everyone deserves a fair hearing." "A fair hearing?" Thorne scoffed. "She'll vanish with the dawn, Sheriff, leaving us to deal with the wreckage she leaves behind. We must protect ourselves." "Protect yourselves from what?" Rosalie finally spoke, her voice surprisingly level, though Boone noticed the tremor in her fingers. "From a woman who arrived penniless. What conceivable threat could I possibly pose?" "You're a danger to our peace, to our traditions," someone yelled from the back. "A viper in the grass, coiled and ready to strike." "That's not true." Rosalie's voice cracked, her carefully constructed composure beginning to crumble. "I came here seeking a clean slate, a place to rebuild my life." "Rebuild what, exactly?" Thorne pressed, his eyes glittering with malice. "Another swindle? A fresh crop of victims?" The accusations intensified, a chaotic symphony of mistrust and apprehension. Rosalie stood her ground, but Boone could see the resolve seeping out of her. All color had drained from her face, rendering her fragile and vulnerable. "Enough!" Boone's command thundered through the church, silencing the mob. He positioned himself in front of Rosalie, his broad form a shield against the hostile stares. "This has gone on long enough. I'm the sheriff of this county, and I won't tolerate an innocent woman being condemned based on conjecture and gossip." He turned to Rosalie, his gaze searching hers. "Miss DeWitt, I understand this is a trying circumstance. I can offer you sanctuary. You can remain at the jail until order is restored, until these allegations can be examined impartially." Rosalie looked at him, her expression a blank canvas. He detected a fleeting glimmer of hope, instantly eclipsed by doubt. "And if you deem me guilty, Sheriff?" "Then you'll face the consequences," Boone responded, his voice unwavering. "But you'll face them within the confines of the law, not at the mercy of a lynch mob." Thorne snorted derisively. "You're playing a dangerous game, Boone. You're defending a venomous creature." Boone disregarded him, his attention fixed on Rosalie. "What is your answer, Miss DeWitt? Do you accept my offer?" Rosalie hesitated, her eyes flitting around the room, cataloging the animosity etched on every face. Finally, she locked eyes with Boone, a spark of defiance flickering within her. "Yes, Sheriff," she whispered, barely audible. "I accept." Boone nodded, a wave of relief flooding him. He had made a choice pregnant with potential repercussions. He had opted to safeguard Rosalie, to trust her, despite the swirling rumors and the palpable animosity of the town. He knew he was treading on treacherous ground, a path paved with potential treachery and heartbreak. But he couldn't turn away. Something in her gaze, something in her vulnerability, compelled him to intervene, to extend her a chance at absolution. As Boone escorted Rosalie from the church, he felt the weight of every gaze boring into him, the unspoken condemnations, the simmering resentment. He knew he had created enemies tonight, formidable enemies who wouldn't hesitate to employ any tactic to achieve their goals. Yet, as he glanced at Rosalie, her face pale but determined, he knew he had acted justly. He had granted her an opportunity, a chance to vindicate herself, a chance to reconstruct her life. And in doing so, he had also afforded himself an opportunity, a chance to demonstrate that even in a town as merciless as redemption, compassion, justice, and perhaps even affection could still flourish. Back in Martha's saloon, now eerily deserted, Martha wrung her hands, her customary cheer replaced by a profound anxiety. "Boone, you've kicked the proverbial hornet's nest. Thorne doesn't take kindly to being defied, particularly not in the public square." Boone sighed, raking a hand through his hair. "I know, Martha, but I couldn't simply stand idly by and watch them tear her apart. They were prepared to condemn her without a shred of proof. Proof or not, people cling to the narratives they wish to embrace," Martha replied, her voice laden with apprehension. "And Thorne possesses the talent to mold those narratives to his liking. You need to tread carefully, Boone. You've placed yourself in a precarious situation." "I'll be cautious," Boone assured, although his words rang hollow. Even to himself. He had pledged to protect Rosalie, and he intended to uphold that pledge, regardless of the personal cost. He glanced towards room 6, the door sealed, the silence within laden with unacknowledged secrets. He suspected Rosalie was concealing something that had led her to redemption and painted a target on her back. But he also believed that she deserved a chance to articulate her version of events, to defend herself against the accusations that were encircling her. And he intended to provide her with that chance, even if it meant jeopardizing everything he held dear. He paused at the foot of the stairs, gazing up at Rosalie's closed door before turning towards the exit of the saloon. A long night stretched before him. Behind the bars, the cell bars, frigid and unforgiving, bit at Rosalie's exposed skin. Perched on the edge of the meager cot, the scratchy blanket offered scant protection from the creeping chill of the flagstone floor. Martha's saloon, even the most cramped room, now seemed like paradise lost. A humorless chuckle rattled from her throat, lost to the jail's heavy quiet. Innocent. She clung to the word like a lifeline, the alternative too terrifying to contemplate. She hugged herself, a futile effort to spark warmth, to barricade herself against the dread that clawed at her insides. Cyrus Thorne's accusations replayed in her mind like a broken record. Swindler, temptress, fabricator. Each syllable a brand, searing her flesh. "It's a lie," she breathed, a whisper intended only for the unyielding stone. Boots echoed on the wooden walkway outside, snapping her to attention. She stiffened, striving for a semblance of poise. Sheriff Boone Mathers materialized, his features shadowed in the gloom. He extended a steaming mug. "Coffee. Thought you might appreciate something to cut the cold." Rosalie hesitated, then accepted the offering, their fingers momentarily connecting. An unexpected, unwelcome current surged through her. She recoiled subtly, focusing on the spiraling vapor. "Thank you, Sheriff," she managed, her voice strained. Boone leaned against the bars, his gaze direct and unwavering. "Redemption's a close-knit town, Miss DeWitt. Secrets have a way of surfacing." Rosalie sipped the brew, its bitterness failing to soothe her jangled nerves. "I have nothing to hide, Sheriff." An eyebrow quirked, a hint of amusement touching his lips. Everyone guards something, Miss DeWitt. The real question is, what price are you willing to pay to keep it buried? She met his eyes, attempting to project innocence, a facade of injured virtue. I'm not concealing anything. Mr. Thorne is simply mistaken. He's confused. Confused enough to denounce you publicly. Before the entire town? Boone countered, his tone even but probing. Confused enough to jeopardize his own standing? Rosalie glanced away, unable to hold his scrutiny. He wields considerable influence, Sheriff. Perhaps he's unaccustomed to being denied. Perhaps he reacts poorly to rejection. Boone pushed off the bars and began to pace the confined corridor. He alleges you defrauded him, and others. Claims you solicited investments, pocketed their funds, and vanished. Is there any truth to this, Miss DeWitt? No, she stated, a touch too swiftly. I never promised investments. I presented opportunities, land acquisitions, resource development. It's not my fault if their ventures proved unsuccessful. Opportunities, you say? Boone repeated, ceasing his pacing. Opportunities requiring a substantial initial outlay, as I understand it. Rosalie's throat constricted. She took another swallow of coffee, buying precious seconds. Venture capital is essential for any endeavor, Sheriff. That's hardly criminal. No, it isn't, Boone conceded. But acquiring funds under false pretenses, that's another matter. And guaranteeing returns you can't possibly ensure that borders on fraud, Miss DeWitt. He paused, then added, Where did you obtain the funds to acquire all this real estate and these so-called resource rights in the first place? She wavered. I had savings. Savings? Boone scoffed, a note of skepticism coloring his voice. Enough to secure prime properties and mineral rights? That's quite the accumulation, Miss DeWitt. What occupation allowed you to amass such a fortune? What line of work were you in? Rosalie's mind scrambled, seeking a credible alibi. The truth was unthinkable. Uttering it was a risk she couldn't take. I was employed at a bank, she offered finally. I was a teller. I practiced diligent saving. Boone regarded her with open disbelief. A teller? At which bank, Miss DeWitt? She swallowed with difficulty. The First National Bank of St. Louis. Boone nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. St. Louis, you say? That's a considerable distance from redemption. He turned and strode to the desk at the end of the hallway. I'll certainly be looking into that. Rosalie tracked his departure, her pulse hammering in her ears. She had to escape this place. She had to disappear before he unraveled her deception. But how? She was trapped, confined like a beast in a cage. Boone settled at his desk, the meager light casting elongated shadows across his weary features. He retrieved a stack of documents, Rosalie's claims on the land and resource rights, alongside the evidence provided by Thorne. He meticulously compared them, scrutinizing every detail. Something felt amiss. He dispatched a deputy to verify her St. Louis story and instructed him to examine the land registry for confirmation of the transactions she claimed to have. Executed. As the deputy departed, Boone leaned back in his chair, massaging his temples. He yearned to believe her. There was a certain quality about her, a fragility coupled with an inner strength, that drew him in. Yet his instincts warned him of her duplicity. Hours later, the deputy returned, his countenance somber. Sheriff, there's no record of a Rosalie DeWitt ever being employed at any bank in St. Louis, particularly not the First National. And the land registry, Well, the dates she cites for her claims don't align with the official records. Some of the properties she alleges to own were actually conveyed weeks, even months, after the dates she provided. Boone sighed heavily, the weight of his duty pressing down on him. He rose and walked back toward Rosalie's cell. She was asleep on the cot, her face gaunt and pale in the dim light. He loathed this aspect of his job. He hated witnessing the erosion of hope in people's eyes, the collapse of their fabrications beneath the weight of evidence. He cleared his throat, and Rosalie stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. She looked at him, her expression a blend of apprehension and defiance. "Sheriff," she said, her voice raspy. Boone held up the documents. "Ms. DeWitt, I investigated your story. I verified your claims. And I regret to inform you that I discovered some inconsistencies." Rosalie sat up straighter, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Boone said, his tone resolute but laced with regret, "that you've been less than truthful with me. You were never employed at a bank in St. Louis, and the dates on your land claims contradict the official records. So, tell me, Miss DeWitt, what is the truth? Because whatever game you're playing, it's come to an end." The cell's chill bit deeper that day, the iron radiating a frigidity that settled like frost on Rosalie's spirit. Boone's visit lingered, his pronouncements echoing, each word a pickaxe chipping away at her carefully fabricated reality. The truth, she feared, was a caged tiger, desperate to break free. Boone discovered Cyrus Thorne at the Golden Nugget, predictably occupying his usual post at the bar's furthest end, a whiskey glass clutched in his hand. The atmosphere was thick with stale smoke and the drone of conversations, a world apart from the grim quiet of the lockup. Thorne glanced up as Boone neared, a hard satisfaction hardening his features, stirring disquiet in the lawman's gut. "Thorne," Boone stated, his tone measured. "Rosalie DeWitt, we need to talk." A dry, grating chuckle escaped Thorne. "So, the sheriff finally arrives. I assumed it would take longer for the scales to fall from your eyes." "I'm not interested in sharing opinions," Boone replied, sliding onto a stool. "I need to grasp yours. Why are you so certain of her guilt?" Thorne swirled the amber liquid, his gaze fixed upon it. "She destroyed my brother, Daniel, slinked into town, flashing smiles and specious promises, convincing him to sink everything into a worthless scheme. He lost it all, Sheriff, reduced to nothing. The disgrace was too much. He ended his life 6 months later." His voice cracked, the veneer of anger dissolving to reveal the raw pain beneath. A flicker of sympathy touched Boone, swiftly extinguished. "I wasn't aware of your brother." "Of course, you weren't." "You weren't," Thorne sneered, regaining a semblance of composure. "She's adept at burying her victims. Daniel wasn't unique, you know. She's been at this for years, exploiting trusting men, draining them dry. I've been tracking her, awaiting my moment to expose her." "You believe this land deal was another iteration of her scheme?" Boone probed, eyes narrowed. "Believe? I know," Thorne declared, slamming his glass down. "Same tactics, same falsehoods. Only this time, I was prepared. I won't permit her to escape again. Not this time." The grief yielded to a steely resolve, a thirst for retribution. Boone leaned back, considering Thorne's account. He couldn't disregard the man's anguish, yet neither could he allow personal vengeance to corrupt the course of justice. "I appreciate the candor, Thorne, but I require evidence. I can't condemn someone on mere si-so." Evidence? Thorne scoffed. It's all there, Sheriff, if you'd only look. Her past, the legacy of broken men. It's all waiting to be discovered. Departing the saloon, Boone carried Thorne's words like a weight. He needed to corroborate Thorne's assertions, delve into Rosalie's history. Still, something about the intensity of Thorne's animosity, the near-obsessive need for reprisal, troubled him. He couldn't shake the feeling that there were deeper currents at play, obscured by Thorne's bereavement. Back at his office, the gravity of his responsibility pressed down. He retraced his steps to the jail, driven by a fresh thought. "Rosalie," he announced, his voice strained. "I need to search your belongings. Everything." Rosalie met his gaze, her expression an enigma. "Why?" she inquired, her voice barely audible. "I have reason to believe you're withholding information," Boone replied, his gaze unwavering. Rosalie hesitated, then offered a slow nod. "Do what you deem necessary." Boone located the trunk in the cell's corner, its brass fittings dulled with age. Rosalie observed him, her eyes a mixture of defiance and resignation. He threw open the trunk, the hinges emitting a mournful groan. Inside, nestled among articles of clothing and personal effects, he spotted it, a slender, leather-bound ledger, its pages densely filled with writing and columns of figures. It lay concealed beneath a silk shawl. He lifted it, his pulse quickening. "What's this?" he queried, his voice hushed. Rosalie's face lost all color. I don't know," she stammered, the lie ringing hollow. Boone opened the ledger, his eyes sweeping the entries. Names, dates, sums of money, a record of transactions, a meticulous account of Rosalie's dealings. As he examined the contents more thoroughly, he uncovered entries that directly contradicted her earlier statements. Entries that implicated her in deceitful dealings. A knot formed in his stomach. He looked up at Rosalie, his face a picture of dismay. "This complicates things, Rosalie," he said, his voice thick with regret. Rosalie remained mute, her gaze fixed on the floor. The carefully constructed image had shattered, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. He continued examining the ledger, turning pages. Then a name leaped out. Cyrus Thorne. A large payment to Thorne several years prior, followed by recurring payments from, quote, someone listed solely as D.T. Boone's thoughts raced, attempting to decipher the implications. Could it signify Daniel Thorne? Boone closed the ledger, his mind reeling. This transcended Rosalie's guilt or innocence. It involved something larger, far more complex. A seed of suspicion sprouted in his gut. He needed to unravel the connection between Rosalie and the Thornes, the secrets lurking within the ledger's pages. The truth, he realized, was a tangled briar patch, and he had only begun to hack his way through it. The shadow of Thorne's vendetta stretched long, threatening to eclipse the principles of justice. The accountant's secret the jail cell reeked of stale air and lost hopes. A sharp, Ferris scent prickling Boone's nostrils. He stood ramrod straight, the purloined ledger a weighty burden in his grip. The oppressive quiet only broken by the insistent plink of a leaky pipe echoing from the building's depths. Rosalie was perched on the edge of the bunk, her posture defeated, her gaze glued to the floor. She seemed diminished, far less imposing than he recalled. "The ledger," he began, the word a palpable thing between them. No response. "It confirms your suspicions." "Which are?" Boone pressed, needing the affirmation, the clarity. "It's evidence," she breathed, barely audible. "Evidence of Cyrus Thorne's true nature, He lowered himself onto the opposite cot, the metal leeringly cold against his thighs. His nature? He claims you destroyed his brother. Her head shot up, a spark igniting in her eyes. His brother was already a ruin. Cyrus merely sought a scapegoat. Someone expendable, like me. Why you, specifically? She inhaled deeply, bracing herself as if for an icy plunge. Rosalie DeWitt isn't my real name. I'm Elara Thorne. The revelation struck Boone like a physical blow, disorienting. He scrutinized her, struggling to reconcile the woman before him with the tapestry of rumors and accusations. Thorne? Your family? His cousin, she spat, the word a bitter draught. I was raised in his long shadow, witnessing him construct his empire on the backs of the vulnerable. My father was one of them. Cyrus bled him dry. And this ledger provides proof? Boone probed, striving for an even, detached tone. It meticulously chronicles his transgressions, she replied carefully. The payoffs, the illicit gains, the stolen land. Everything he believed, buried deep. My father was a meticulous record-keeper. He aspired to expose Cyrus, but her voice faltered, her gaze averted once more. He passed before he could. Boone observed her, noting the stark grief etched into her features, a sorrow deeper than any accusation could reach. So you inherited his crusade? She nodded curtly, jaw clenched. I unearthed the ledger after his passing. I felt compelled to act. I reinvented myself, acquired certain skills, and infiltrated Cyrus's inner circle. My aim was to amass further evidence, ensuring I possessed enough to dismantle his operations. What about those payments, then? The ones earmarked for Cyrus within the ledger? Boone queried, a pit growing in his stomach. And those to D.T.? She winced, a pang of torment briefly distorting her face. The payments to Cyrus were a necessary evil, bribes facilitating access, allaying suspicions. As for D.T., that signifies Duncan Tierney, Cyrus's enforcer, the instrument of his darkest deeds. I had to compensate him for intelligence, for opportunities. I recognized the inherent danger, yet I believed I could control it. But you underestimated him, Boone concluded, the puzzle pieces snapping together. He detected your subterfuge. He grew suspicious, she amended. Hence the allegations of fraud. He needed to discredit me, to confiscate the ledger. Boone lapsed into thoughtful silence, internalizing her account. He examined the ledger in his hand, the precise columns of numerals and names, testament to a father's frustrated pursuit of justice and a daughter's audacious endeavor to realize it. He looked at Rosalie DeWitt, discerned not a swindler, but a woman impelled by loss and an unyielding thirst for retribution. A shift occurred within him, a seismic tremor threatening to shatter his bedrock beliefs. He had grounded his life in the tenets of the law, in the inviolable division between right and wrong. But this was a convoluted labyrinth of motives and perfidy, where distinctions blurred and the truth lay concealed beneath layers of deception. Why withhold this from me initially? He asked, his voice coarse. She finally met his scrutiny, her gaze a mixture of challenge and fragility. Would you have entertained it? You were predisposed to condemn, quick to embrace Cyrus's fabrications. I needed self-preservation and to protect this. He couldn't gainsay her assessment. He had condemned her, predicated on surface appearances and unfounded charges. He had allowed Cyrus's poison to corrupt his reasoning. I required time to consider, he declared, rising to his feet. I must corroborate your narrative. She nodded mutely, her expression inscrutable. I comprehend. He approached the cell door, his hand gripping the frigid metal bars. He hesitated, then pivoted back towards her. Elora, he said, the appellation feeling foreign on his tongue. Exercise caution. He departed, the weight of her disclosure pressing down on him. He traversed the hushed thoroughfares of redemption, the waning sun casting drawn-out shadows mirroring the uncertainty within his heart. He was pledged to uphold the law, to safeguard the blameless. But what if the law was being manipulated to shield the culpable? What if the innocent was being denounced for pursuing righteousness? He found himself drawn to the creek skirting the periphery of town, the same locale where he'd first encountered Rosalie. The water flowed relentlessly, carving its course through the stones, oblivious to the dramas enacted upon its banks. He lowered himself onto a polished flat rock, the ledger positioned beside him. He opened it anew, scrutinizing the entries, the dates, the signatories. He needed verification, incontrovertible proof that would withstand the scrutiny of the courtroom. But, more crucially, he needed to harmonize the woman he believed he knew with the woman who had revealed her true self. The air chilled as twilight descended, the sky streaked with hues of coral and lavender. He closed the ledger, the sound amplifying in the stillness. He knew the requisite action. He needed to investigate, to pursue the trail of evidence, irrespective of its destination. He needed to unearth the verity, even if it entailed confronting Cyrus Thorne, even if it threatened the very foundations of redemption. He stood, resolved. He would afford Elara the benefit of the doubt, but he would also maintain vigilance, wary, prepared for any eventuality. Retracing his steps towards town, he discerned her form silhouetted against the gridded window of her cell. He paused, transfixed. He returned to the jail. He let himself inside. He approached her cell and released the lock. "Sheriff?" she queried, alarm now shadowing her face. "Come with me," Boone instructed, his tone hushed and urgent. "It's not safe here." She regarded him, probing his gaze. "Where are we headed?" "Somewhere secure," he answered. "Somewhere conducive to conversation. Somewhere I can ensure your safety." He extended his hand, and after a moment of contemplation, she accepted it. Her hand felt small and warm in his, her touch sending a tremor through him. He guided her out of the jail, into the shrouded night, toward an unpredictable future. As they walked, their hands still joined, she whispered, "Thank you, Boone." He offered no response, uncertain of the wisdom of his action, unsure of what lay ahead. He simply knew that he couldn't abandon her there, vulnerable and alone. He had made a choice that could potentially cost him everything. But as he looked at her, at the unwavering resolve in her eyes, he knew that he couldn't have acted any differently. He knew that he felt drawn to her, spurred not only by duty or curiosity, but by something profound, something he lacked the words to define. And he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would confront them alongside her, side by side. Jailbreak, the initial gunshot tore through the stillness, a jagged rent in redemption's deceptive tranquility. Boone, spring-taut on the cot in Rosalie's cell, reacted instinctively. He slammed her to the floor. The coppery scent of blood mixed with the grit of falling plaster assailed him. "Get down! Stay down!" The jailhouse became a war zone. A chaotic barrage of gunfire, fractured glass, and splintered wood assaulted the ears. Colt drawn, Boone dropped to a crouch, returning fire through the bars. The undisciplined, wild attack bore the hallmarks of Cyrus Thorne's enforcer's hired muscle. emboldened by cheap whiskey and a deeper fear. Thorn's retribution for failure. Rosalie, face ashen in the wavering lamplight, huddled against the wall. What is happening? Who's doing this? Her voice shook, yet a peculiar spark flickered in her gaze. Not purely terror, but something akin to recognition. Or perhaps even grim acceptance. Thorn, Boone bit out, thumbing the spent casings from his revolver. He aims to bury your secrets. A quick glance showed two figures outlined in the doorway, blazing away haphazardly. 2 shots later, one clutched his forearm, a strangled cry escaping his lips as he collapsed. Silenced? Rosalie breathed, barely audible. He's going to kill me? Ignoring her, Boone concentrated on survival. I'm springing you. He reholstered his weapon, fumbling for the heavy iron key on his belt. The lock's tumblers clicked, the sound amplified by the surrounding pandemonium. Wait! Rosalie protested, grabbing his arm. What are you doing? You're the sheriff. Flickering lamplight sculpted sharp planes across her face, emphasizing the stubborn line of her jaw. I'm making a choice, Boone stated, his voice clipped. Now move. He hauled her from the cell into the cramped corridor. The air hung thick with smoke and the sharp tang of gunpowder. Another fusillade slammed into the building, showering them with debris. Boone shoved Rosalie against the wall, shielding her. A hot needle pricked his shoulder, a grazing bullet. He bit back a curse, ignoring the sting. We need the back exit, he grunted, voice tight. Leads to the alley. They sprinted, Boone in the lead, senses screaming. The jailhouse was small, but its confines made it a deadly trap. Reaching the back door, they found it barred from the outside. Damn it, Boone swore, slamming a fist into the timber. The sounds of their pursuers grew louder. Rosalie stepped forward, eyes hardening. Stand clear, she ordered, drawing a small, silver-plated derringer from her boot. Boone hadn't suspected she was armed. Before he could speak, she fired. The diminutive weapon roared. The sound reverberated in the confined space. The bar shattered, the door swinging inward. Let's go, Rosalie commanded, her voice surprisingly firm. She was transformed. Fear replaced by a cool, calculating resolve. They surged into the alley, inhaling the cool night air. Shadows cloaked the jail's rear, offering a fleeting sanctuary. But they knew it wouldn't last. Which way? Rosalie queried, scanning their surroundings. Out of redemption, Boone replied, his voice edged with steel. Before Thorn dispatches a posse. They fled through the shadows, skirting the main thoroughfares, heading towards the edge of town. He knew they were finished in redemption. He'd broken his oath, turned renegade. Now he was an outlaw, shielding a woman accused of fraud. A woman who was clearly concealing secrets. Reaching the edge of town, Boone spotted the livery. Jebediah, the owner, a weathered soul, wouldn't pry too deep. We need horses, Boone said softly. First, they slipped inside, the familiar scent of hay and animals filling their lungs. Jebediah slept in his chair, snoring gently. Boone roused him. Jebediah, Boone urged, his voice rough. 2 horses. Now. Jebediah blinked, eyes swimming with sleep. He took in Boone, then Rosalie, his expression tightening. What's happening, Boone? All that gunfire? No time, Boone retorted. Just the horses. He tossed a wad of notes onto the table. Keep the rest. Jebediah hesitated, then nodded curtly. He knew better than to argue with Boone in this mood. He swiftly saddled 2 mounts, his movements economical. "Be careful, Boone," Jebediah warned, his voice gravelly. "This won't end well." Boone nodded, his face a mask. He knew Jebediah spoke the truth. He boosted Rosalie into the saddle, then mounted his own. "Thanks, Jebediah," Boone muttered. "I owe you." He spurred his horse into a gallop, Rosalie hard on his heels. They burst from redemption, swallowed by the darkness, leaving behind everything Boone had held dear. He glanced back. The town's lights flickered faintly behind them. He knew there was no return. As they rode, the magnitude of his choice settled heavily on him. He was a fugitive, a lawman turned outlaw. He had gambled everything on Rosalie, a virtual stranger, a woman steeped in danger. Yet he couldn't ignore the undeniable pull, the feeling that there was more to her story than met the eye. "Why are you doing this?" Rosalie's voice cut through the wind. "Why are you helping me?" Boone hesitated, searching for the right words. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "Maybe I'm a damn fool. Maybe I believe you're innocent. Or maybe," he paused, his gaze locking with hers, "maybe I just couldn't stomach seeing Cyrus Thorne win." Rosalie studied him, her expression unreadable. "You don't know what you're facing," she warned, her voice low. "Cyrus Thorne's reach is long. He won't let this drop. I know," Boone said, his voice hardening. "But I'm not afraid of Cyrus Thorne, and I'm not standing by while he gets away with this." He hesitated, then pressed. "Just what's in that ledger, Rosalie? What makes it worth killing for?" Rosalie averted her gaze. "It's evidence," she confessed at last. "Evidence of his corruption, enough to bring him to his knees." "What kind of corruption?" Boone insisted. "What has he done?" Rosalie drew a shuddering breath. "Everything," she whispered, her voice laced with bitterness. "He's stolen, cheated, lied, ruined lives, shattered families. He's a monster, Boone, and he needs to be stopped." Boone looked at her, a pang of sympathy clenching his heart at the pain etched into her features. He knew she spoke the truth. Cyrus Thorne was a viper, capable of anything to protect his dominion. And he knew he'd made the right choice, regardless of the cost. The first tendrils of dawn brushed the horizon, casting elongated shadows across the desolate landscape. They pressed on, Boone and Rosalie, outlaws from justice, bonded by circumstance, driven by a shared hunger for retribution. They rode into the uncertainties of the future. They were united, and that was all that mattered. For now. Mountain Refuge the cabin, a weathered gray box of ancient logs, nestled in a hidden fold of the Redemption Mountains. Boone silenced the buckboard's rattling engine, the ensuing quiet pressing down, broken only by whispering pines. Beside him, Rosalie's wince accompanied her shift. The brutal journey had aggravated her bruised ribs. He'd pushed hard, a man possessed by the need to distance them from Thorne's grasping hand. "This is it," she breathed, a rasp in her voice. Her gaze swept the dilapidated structure, doubt clouding her features. "Hardly a sanctuary." "Safe," Boone stated, the word a bedwrought promise for them both. Grandfather's place, forgotten by everyone. He hopped down, his shoulders screaming in protest, a painful echo of the brawl at the jail. Pine and damp earth flooded his nostrils, an aromatic escape from the jail's miasma of stale liquor and desperation. Extending a hand, he helped Rosalie descend. She leaned on him, that brief contact sending a sharp current through him, a perilous warmth he fought to ignore. Inside, the air hung thick and stagnant. dust motes pirouetted in the feeble light that seeped through clouded windows. A single room offered a rickety table, 2 mismatched chairs, and a stone hearth. A threadbare quilt lay rumpled on a cot in the corner. Stark, yes, but a refuge nonetheless. Not exactly a palace, Boone admitted, the small space amplifying his voice. Rosalie's hand glided across the rough-hewn surface of the table. "It's secluded," she offered, a note of relief coloring her tone. "That's what matters most." He set to work building a fire, his movements economical and well-practiced. Soon, dancing flames devoured the chill, painting the walls with flickering shadows. He caught Rosalie watching him, her expression an enigma. "Let's have a look at those ribs," he said, gentling his voice. A hesitant lift of her shirt revealed the blossoming purple contusions. A surge of incandescent rage, focused solely on Thorn, coursed through Boone. He grabbed the waterskin and a strip of clean cloth. "This might sting," he warned, dabbing gingerly at the wounds. She bit back any sound, her eyes locked on his. He glimpsed something there, perhaps naked vulnerability, perhaps simple gratitude. He couldn't decipher it. He was too near, too aware of the curve of her throat, the faint, lingering perfume of lavender in her hair. "Thank you," she murmured when he finished. "The least I could do," he replied, evading her gaze as he busied himself banking the fire, needing to create distance. "I'll fetch some water." Outside, the mountain air possessed a biting freshness. Boone walked to the stream, the sound of rushing water a melodic balm on his raw nerves. He knelt, filling the skin, the cold numbing his fingers. He wrestled with his broken oath, the abandoned badge, the shattered trust. But then he conjured the image of Rosalie, bruised but unbowed, defying Thorn's accusations. He couldn't have abandoned her. Not after witnessing the raw terror in her expression, the urgency in her plea. Back at the cabin, Rosalie sat mesmerized by the flickering embers. He passed her the waterskin. "I need to tell you something," she began, her voice barely audible, "about Cyrus and the ledger." He settled beside her, his gaze drawn to the flames. "I'm listening." She inhaled deeply, the firelight playing across her features, deepening the shadows beneath her eyes. "It began a few years back," she recounted, her voice gaining strength as she detailed Thorn's machinations, his avarice, his insidious manipulation of the town's finances. She spoke of the ledger, a meticulous record of his illicit dealings, a document she'd unearthed and concealed. "He wants it," she finished, her voice trembling now. "He'll stop at nothing to retrieve it." "Its location?" Boone inquired, his tone even. "Safe," she responded, a spark of defiance returning to her eyes. "For the time being." Silence settled between them, punctuated only by the fire's crackling symphony. Boone scrutinized her face, searching for any flicker of deception. He found only fear, coupled with a fierce, unwavering courage. "Why not alert the authorities?" he questioned. Rosalie offered a dry, humorless laugh. "And trust the very individuals lining his pockets? You were there, in redemption. He permeates everything." He conceded the point. Thorn's influence ran like poison through the town. He'd witnessed it firsthand, the obsequious deference, the veiled anxiety. "I believe you," Boone blurted, the words surprising even him. Rosalie's eyes widened in disbelief. "You do?" He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I do." He couldn't pinpoint the reason for his conviction. Perhaps it was her defiant stance against Thorn, the raw vulnerability he'd glimpsed. or something more elusive, something he couldn't articulate. As the hours drifted by, they shared their stories. Boone spoke of his life in redemption, of his father, of the ingrained sense of duty that had always guided him. Rosalie divulged fragments of her past, her travels, the dreams she'd been forced to relinquish. Two souls, fractured and seeking solace in each other's presence, bound together by circumstance and a common adversary. The fire waned, casting elongated, dancing shadows upon the walls. A chill permeated the air. Boone rose to replenish the flames. Turning back, he found Rosalie watching him, her gaze a complex blend of gratitude and something deeper, something that stirred a frantic rhythm in his chest. He moved toward her, compelled by an unseen force. His hand rose, his palm gently cupping her cheek. Her skin felt soft, radiating warmth beneath his touch. Her eyes closed, her face tilting into his hand. "Boone," she breathed, the sound barely audible. He descended, his lips ghosting across hers a hesitant offering, a silent question. She responded, her lips parting in invitation. He deepened the kiss, his arms encircling her, drawing her closer. A desperate confluence of fear, loneliness, shared peril, and unspoken desire. A kiss that shattered the remnants of his self-control. He broke the contact, his breath ragged and uneven. He met her gaze, her eyes dark with a palpable longing. Reason screamed at him. He knew it was wrong, reckless, but he was powerless to resist. He craved her. "Rosalie," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. Her reply was a second kiss, her arms tightening around his neck. Gone was the hesitation, the restraint. A kiss that promised everything, a kiss that threatened to consume them both. A plan of action. The fire crackled, spitting embers that danced like nervous thoughts in the small cabin. Rosalie sat propped against a stack of Boone's old wool blankets, her arm in a makeshift sling. The pain in her shoulder was a dull throb, a constant reminder of their escape. But the fire in her eyes burned brighter. "We can't just stay here, Boone. Cyrus won't stop looking." Boone, pacing the worn wooden floor, stopped and ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "I know that, but we can't just ride out blindly either. We need a plan." He felt the weight of his sheriff's badge, now tucked away in a drawer, a silent accusation. He had sworn to uphold the law, and here he was, an outlaw himself. "The ledger," Rosalie said, her voice firm despite the pain. "It's the only leverage we have. Cyrus knows it, and he'll do anything to get it back." "Which means he'll expect us to run," Boone countered, his gaze meeting hers. "He'll have men watching the roads, the train depots every obvious route." "Then we don't take an obvious route." Rosalie shifted slightly, wincing. "The territorial governor, Governor Wells, he's known to be a fair man. If we can get the ledger to him, expose Cyrus's dealings." Boone considered it. Wells was a stickler for the rules, but he was also incorruptible. "It's a long shot, Rosalie, getting to the capital unseen." "We have to try," she insisted, her voice laced with a desperate plea. "It's the only way to stop him. Not just for me, Boone, but for redemption, for everyone Cyrus is bleeding dry." He saw the truth in her eyes, the genuine fear and determination. He saw, too, the way she'd endured the pain and kept focused on their goal, and a warmth spread through him, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. He was a fool, probably, that he was past caring. "All right," he said, his voice resolute. "We go to the governor." The decision made, A sense of purpose settled over them, pushing back the fear. Boone moved to the table, spreading out a tattered map of the territory. The main roads are out. We'll have to cut through the Blackwood Forest. It's rough terrain, but it's the least likely place Cyrus will expect us. Rosalie leaned closer, tracing a finger along the map. There's a small trading post near the western edge of the forest, run by a man named Jedediah. He keeps to himself, doesn't ask questions. Jedediah might be our best bet for supplies. Boone marked the N. Location on the map. From there, we can skirt around Oakhaven and head towards the capital. It'll add days to the journey, but it's safer. He studied the map, calculating distances, considering possible dangers. We'll travel at night, rest during the day, keep off the roads. It'll be slow, but it's our best chance of staying hidden. We'll need horses, Rosalie said, her gaze thoughtful. And supplies. Food, water, ammunition. Boone nodded. I have a couple of good horses in the stable, reliable, used to rough country, and I've got some provisions stored in the cellar, enough to get us started. He started gathering what he needed, his movements efficient and practiced. I'll need to check my gun safe, too. As Boone prepared, Rosalie watched him, a flicker of something akin to hope in her eyes. You're really doing this, aren't you? Risking everything for me. He paused, his hand resting on the door of the gun safe. He looked back at her, his expression unreadable. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, Rosalie. Cyrus needs to be stopped. He met her gaze steadily, then added, his voice softer. And maybe I'm tired of playing it safe. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. He opened the safe, the metallic click echoing in the small room. He gathered his rifle, his revolver, a box of ammunition. He moved with a quiet competence, a man preparing for a battle he wasn't sure he could win. Later, as the moon climbed high in the inky sky, they stood outside the cabin, two dark figures silhouetted against the starlit landscape. Boone had rigged a makeshift saddlebag for Rosalie, filled with supplies and a small canteen of water. He helped her mount her horse, his hands lingering on her waist for a moment longer than necessary. Are you sure you're up for this? He asked, his voice low. Rosalie met his gaze, her eyes shining in the moonlight. I have to be, Boone. There's too much at stake. She straightened in the saddle, her chin lifted in defiance. Besides, she added with a wry smile, I have a feeling things are about to get interesting. Boone mounted his own horse, the leather creaking softly. He adjusted his hat, pulling it low over his eyes. He knew this was a turning point, a line crossed that could never be uncrossed. He was leaving behind everything he knew, everything he had built, for a woman he barely knew and a cause he wasn't even sure he believed in, not fully. Yet, as he looked at Rosalie, her face pale but determined in the moonlight, he knew he couldn't turn back. He spurred his horse forward, and they rode into the darkness, two fugitives on a desperate quest for justice. The cabin disappeared behind them, swallowed by the trees, and with it, the life Boone Mathers had known. Perilous journey, the Blackwood's reputation preceded it. The canopy choked the light, plunging the game trail into a perpetual gloaming that set Boone's teeth on edge. Each snap underfoot, every whisper of wind through the leaves, sparked a fresh wave of apprehension. Rosalie, though clearly suffering, rode with a tight-lipped resolve, her sharp eyes darting amongst the ancient trees. Her pain thrummed, a silent, invisible heat, yet no complaint escaped her, especially not for his benefit. Think Thorne anticipates this route? She finally asked, her tone clipped, revealing nothing of her discomfort. Boone tightened his hold on the leather reins. Thorn's not simple. He'll have eyes on the obvious routes, the roads, the passes. This is a gamble on the unexpected. He refrained from adding that it was a gamble with lethal stakes. The woods offered concealment to them as well as anyone hunting them. The canyon, a narrow defile slicing through the landscape, felt suspiciously convenient, its sheer rock faces forming an ideal ambush site. A knot of unease tightened in Boone's gut. Too easy. He drew back on the reins, halting his horse and signaling Rosalie. "Trouble?" she inquired, her hand drifting instinctively toward the pistol nestled in her waistband. "Something feels off," Boone confessed, his gaze sweeping the heights. Too quiet by half. As if summoned by his words, the silence imploded. A fusillade of shots ripped from the canyon rim, bullets gnawing chunks from the stone around them. Boone swore, hauling Rosalie from her saddle. They scrambled from meager shelter behind a jumble of boulders as lead rained down. "Damn them!" Rosalie spat, returning fire with surprising zeal. "How many are up there?" "More than enough," Boone growled, peering cautiously. He counted at least 6 men lining the precipice, their rifles tracking their every move. "We're pinned here, like rats in a barrel." "Then enlighten me, Sheriff," Rosalie snapped, expertly reloading. "Or are we to simply wave the white flag?" "Surrender is not an option," Boone declared, his jaw clenched. "We have to find a way out. Now." He spotted a slender fissure in the rock wall, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. "There! Think you can manage?" Rosalie sized up the crevice, then back at their attackers. "It'll be tight, but it's better than becoming target practice." They bolted for the opening, bullets buzzing past their ears like angry hornets. Boone squeezed through first, the rough stone scraping his sides. Reaching back, he hauled Rosalie after him, her face etched with pain. The fissure gave way to a small, secret alcove. Crouched within, they fought to catch their breath. The gunfire raged outside, impacting the rock with dull thuds. "That was a near thing," Rosalie said, her voice still ragged. "Too damn close," Boone agreed. "But we're far from safe." He risked a peek through the crevice. The gunmen, still firing sporadically, were beginning to fan out, systematically searching. "We need another route," Rosalie said, her gaze sweeping the small cave. Boone nodded, agreeing. There has to be one. They explored the confines, their hands feeling along the cold, damp stone. At last Rosalie located it, a constricted tunnel that burrowed deeper into the mountain's heart. "This way," she breathed, a sliver of hope piercing her exhaustion. The tunnel was pitch black and cramped, forcing them to creep forward on hands and knees. The air hung heavy with dust and a musty smell that tightened Boone's chest. Claustrophobia threatened to overwhelm him, but he shoved it down. Rosalie was counting on him. After what felt like an eternity spent inching through the earth, the tunnel opened into a second, larger cavern. A small aperture in the roof allowed a single ray of sunshine to penetrate the gloom. "We're making progress," Boone rasped, his throat raw. They scaled the wall toward the light, dragging themselves onto a narrow ledge. From their vantage point, they could make out the river their next trial. It surged, a ribbon of furious white water, its current a relentless force. "That's not going to be a stroll in the park," Rosalie observed grimly, her eyes fixed on the torrent. "No, it's not," Boone concurred. "But we've got precious little choice." They descended to the riverbank, their weary horses trailing behind. As they reached the edge of the churning water, They saw them Thorne's men, positioned on the far side, barring their path. "Well, well," a voice bellowed across the water's roar. "Looks like the sheriff and his lady have reached the end of the line." It was Jebediah, Thorne's ruthless enforcer, known for his cruelty and unwavering loyalty. Boone drew his pistol, his expression hardening. "You're a long way from redemption, Jebediah." "Just here to escort you both back where you belong," Jebediah sneered, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "Alive, if you cooperate. Otherwise," he let the threat hang in the air. "We're not surrendering," Rosalie stated, her voice ringing with defiance. "That's your prerogative," Jebediah responded, raising his rifle. "But it's also your death warrant." Boone knew a direct confrontation was suicide. They were outmanned and outgunned. He needed a diversion, a window of opportunity to cross the treacherous river. He met Rosalie's gaze, seeking understanding. "Can you swim?" "Competently," she replied, comprehension flickering in her eyes. "Good," Boone said, swiftly outlining his plan, his voice low and urgent. Rosalie nodded, her expression a mask of grim determination. "Let's do it." Boone stepped into view, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "All right, Jebediah, you win. We yield." Jebediah chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "That's more like it. Now, ease your weapons down and wade across. Nice and easy." Boone slowly lowered his pistol, placing it carefully on the muddy bank. Rosalie mirrored his actions. But as she bed to the ground, she scooped up a handful of loose stones and hurled them at Jebediah's face. "Now!" she screamed. Boone reacted instantly. Grabbing Rosalie's hand, he plunged into the frigid river, dragging her with him. The water hit them like a shock, the current a relentless, icy grip. They struggled to keep their heads above water, battling the river's unforgiving pull. Bullets peppered the water around them, a constant reminder of the danger they faced. Boone shielded Rosalie as best he could, urging her forward. They were halfway across, their lungs burning, their muscles screaming in protest. Suddenly, Rosalie gasped, her eyes wide with alarm, pointing towards the opposite bank. "Look!" Boone followed her gaze. Thorne's men were mounting their horses, intent on riding downriver to cut them off. Time was running out. Rosalie, fueled by adrenaline despite her injury, surged ahead, spotting a dense thicket of willows clinging to the riverbank. "There!" she cried above the roar of the water. "We can reach it." With a final surge of strength, they clawed their way to the willows, collapsing onto the muddy bank, gasping for air. The hooves of the horses thundered past, their riders oblivious to their desperate struggle. They lay there for a long moment, recovering their breath, the sound of pursuit fading into the distance. At last, Boone pushed himself up, his gaze searching Rosalie's. "You all right?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. Rosalie nodded, her face pale but resolute. "I'm alive, thanks to you." Boone smiled, a rare, genuine expression that lit up his face. "We make a formidable team, you and I." They rose to their feet, their bodies aching, their clothing plastered to their skin. The Blackwood forest loomed before them, vast and ominous. Their ordeal was far from over, but for this moment, they were safe, at least for the moment. "Where to now, Sheriff?" Rosalie asked, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Boone met her eyes, a renewed sense of purpose filling him. He couldn't predict what awaited them, but one thing was certain. He wouldn't allow Cyrus Thorne to triumph, not if he drew another breath. "To Governor Wells," he declared, his voice steady and resolute. To justice, however long it takes. The air hung thick and heavy, still laced with the scent of gunpowder from their near demise. Boone led the way, Rosalie limping slightly behind, towards a break in the dense trees. A hidden clearing bathed in the fading light of the setting sun. A fire crackled merrily in the center, casting dancing shadows on the faces of the men gathered around it. Outlaws. There was no mistaking the rough-hewn clothes, the wary eyes, the casual way they wore their guns. Boone recognized the brand on one of the horses stolen from a rancher north of Redemption last spring. "Well, well," a voice drawled, as a man detached himself from the group. He was tall and lean, with a face etched with hard living and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sheriff Boone Mathers, fancy meeting you out here. And is that Rosalie DeWitt? You're a long way from Redemption, Sheriff, and she's a long way from jail." Boone kept his hand close to his Colt. "Chance brought us here. We just passing through." The outlaw leader chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Chance, huh? More like trouble. Trouble always seems to find this clearing. I'm Jedediah, by the way. Jedediah Stone. And these are my associates." He gestured to the men around the fire, each giving a curt nod or a silent glare. "We heard about what happened back in Blackwood Canyon. Thorn's got half the county looking for you, too." Rosalie, leaning against a tree, her face pale but defiant, spoke for the first time. "We don't need your help, Stone." Jedediah's smile widened, showing a flash of yellowed teeth. "Maybe not. But maybe you do. Thorn's got deep pockets, Sheriff. And he's not afraid to use them. You two won't last long on your own, not with the whole territory hunting you." He paused, letting the words sink in. "We could offer you shelter, protection. For a price, of course." Boone's gaze narrowed. He didn't trust these men any further than he could throw them. But Rosalie was injured, and they were running out of options. "What's the price, Stone?" "Information," Jedediah said, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "We hear Miss DeWitt is carrying something that Cyrus Thorne wants real bad." "A ledger, maybe? We'd be interested in taking a look at that ledger." "Sharing, you might say." Boone felt Rosalie stiffen beside him. He knew about the ledger, the one she claimed held evidence of Thorne's corruption. It was the reason she was in this mess in the first place. He looked at Rosalie, a silent question in his eyes. She met his gaze. Her own eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. Boone turned back to Jedediah. "The ledger's not ours to give. We're heading to Governor Wells. He's the only one who can do anything about Thorne." Jedediah's smile vanished. "The governor? You think he'll listen to a couple of fugitives?" "Thorne owns half the state, Sheriff. Wells is in his pocket." "Maybe," Boone conceded, "but it's our only shot." "You're a fool, Mathers," Jedediah spat. "Pride will get you killed. We're offering you a way out, a chance to fight back. Don't throw it away." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Think about it, Sheriff. Thorne will stop at nothing to get that ledger. He'll kill you both. We can protect you, help you expose him. But we need that ledger." Boone stood his ground, his jaw tight. The offer was tempting. He couldn't deny it. These men knew the land, knew how to survive outside the law. They could provide the resources and manpower he and Rosalie desperately needed. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd be trading one devil for another. Jedediah Stone was no saint. He'd used the ledger for his own gain, not for justice. He glanced at Rosalie again. Her face was pale and drawn, but her eyes were unwavering. She trusted him, and he wouldn't betray that trust, not even for the promise of safety. "We appreciate the offer, Stone," Boone said, his voice firm, "but we'll take our chances." Jedediah's eyes narrowed, his gaze hardening. "You're making a mistake, Sheriff. A big one." He stepped back, gesturing to his men. "All right, let them go." "They'll be back." "They always come back." Boone nodded curtly, then took Rosalie's arm, guiding her away from the fire, back into the sheltering darkness of the trees. As they walked, he could feel Jedediah's eyes burning into his back. "You sure about that, Boone?" Rosalie asked, her voice barely a whisper. "He could have helped us." Boone stopped, turning to face her. "I don't trust him, Rosalie. He wants the ledger for himself. He doesn't care about justice, only about what he can gain." "But what if he's right about Wells? What if the governor won't listen?" Boone sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Then we'll find another way. We have to. We can't give up now." He looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of doubt. He saw only a flicker of fear, quickly replaced by a spark of determination. She was a fighter, he knew that now. And he would fight alongside her, even if it meant facing down the entire territory. "We'll make it, Rosalie," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "We'll find justice, even if we have to tear this whole damn system down to get it." They continued their trek through the woods, the darkness closing in around them. The firelight of the outlaw camp faded behind them, replaced by the cold, hard reality of their situation. They were fugitives, hunted by a powerful man and forced to rely on their own wits and courage. But they were not alone. They had each other. And that, Boone realized, was worth more than all the gold in the territory. He knew he had made the right decision, even if it was the harder one. He would trust his gut, protect Rosalie, and find justice, no matter the cost. Ghosts of the past the wind worried at their camp's canvas, a persistent murmur mirroring Rosalie's inner disquiet. A distance separated her from Boone, the firelight painting her face with shifting patterns, emphasizing the subtle map of her anxieties. The quiet hung heavy, broken only by the fire's snap and the distant lament of a coyote. He sensed her struggle transcended their immediate peril. Boone poured from the coffee pot, perched precariously above the embers. The brew's acrid fragrance cut through the vast emptiness, a meager solace. He held out the tin cup. "Rosalie?" She declined with a shake of her head, eyes glued to the blaze. "It's more than just Cyrus," she confessed, her voice threadbare. "It's faith. I struggle to offer it freely." Boone knelt beside her, setting the cup aside. No pressure, no demands, just space. Years prior, she began, her voice gaining a fragile strength. Before redemption, before Rosalie DeWitt shed her skin and became Elara Thorne, I confided in someone. He possessed my entire heart. She choked back emotion, her eyes gleaming like whetstones in the fireglow. He was privy to Cyrus's machinations, knew about the stolen land, the crooked deals, everything, and swore he'd help me expose it all. The fire spit, scattering sparks like glittering insects into the dark expanse. Rosalie remained unmoved. Her gaze remained fixed on the heart of the flames, as if replaying a tragic theater within. He betrayed me, Boone. Sold my secrets to Cyrus for a pittance. Every confidence, every whispered plan weaponized against me. He unveiled my strategies and even guided Cyrus's thugs to my sanctuary. Her voice cracked, raw and exposed. I barely clawed my way out. That's why I'm like this. Why trust comes so hard-won. Boone's hand covered hers, finding her skin clammy despite the radiating heat. I follow, he murmured. She searched his face, her eyes a complex blend of hurt and defiance. Really? Can you fathom what it means to have your heart ripped out and then pulverized underfoot? He squeezed her hand gently. Perhaps I do, he replied, his voice low and resonant. He hesitated, a fleeting shadow crossing his features. He rarely unearthed the buried pain of his family's tragedy, a wound carefully concealed beneath layers of duty and grit. But witnessing Rosalie's raw vulnerability, he knew he couldn't remain silent. Not now. He inhaled deeply, the frigid air stinging his lungs. My family, Sarah, my wife, and our son, little Caleb. They were victims of a bandit raid, outlaws hunting for scant supplies. It was a brutal winter. We had little to lose. He paused, the memory a persistent ache. I was on patrol. When I returned, they'd vanished. The cabin had been razed. Everything swallowed by the flames. He averted his gaze, the vision still too agonizing. The silence returned, yet transformed. Now it resonated with shared understanding, a silent acknowledgement of suffering. I tracked them, he continued, his voice roughened with grief. Days on end, I located their camp, but I arrived too late. Sarah Caleb were already... The sentence remained unfinished. The image of their lifeless forms, stark against the snow, was permanently etched upon his soul. Rosalie returned the pressure of his hand, her touch gentle and supportive. He looked back, finding not pity, but empathy in her eyes. I grasped the meaning of losing everything, she whispered. The taste of betrayal, the desolation of being left with nothing but rage and despair. He nodded, speechless. He dedicated years to burying his anguish, seeking numbness through ceaseless work and obligation. He'd erected impenetrable walls around his heart, convinced he could never risk love again. But Rosalie, she was dismantling those barriers, piece by painstaking piece. Revenge consumed me for years, he confessed. Hunting the animals responsible, I found and killed them all, eventually. But it altered nothing. It didn't bring them back. I was merely hollow. Rosalie edged closer, her hand ascending to cradle his cheek. Her touch radiated warmth and comfort. None of it was your fault, Boone, she offered. None of it was your doing. He closed his eyes, relishing her touch, her words. He hadn't heard such balm in an age. He hadn't permitted himself to believe it. Nor was it yours, Rosalie, he countered, opening his eyes to meet hers. Cyrus's actions what befell you, you are not culpable. She remained silent, but he detected a glimmer of something nascent in her eyes. Hope. A fragile light in the enveloping darkness. They remained in quietude for a long while, the fire steadily diminishing, the wind still sighing through the trees. But the silence no longer carried the weight of discomfort. It was a communion born of shared sorrow, of mutual sympathy, of a deepening connection between two souls who had each endured immense loss. Eventually, Rosalie spoke, her voice hushed but firm. We'll bring him down, Boone, she vowed. We'll expose Cyrus and his crimes, and we'll achieve it together. He nodded, his grip tightening on her hand. Together, he echoed. The path would be treacherous, fraught with peril, he knew. But he was no longer alone. He had Rosalie, and that single fact shifted everything. He studied her eyes, seeing the dance of firelight within, the reflection of burgeoning hope. He saw the lingering specter of Ilara Thorne, the woman scorned and abused. But he also saw Rosalie DeWitt, the woman who had summoned the strength to retaliate. And in that profound instant, he pledged to protect her at all costs, to aid her quest for justice, even at the expense of everything he possessed. Corrupted city, the closer they got to the city of Oakhaven, the tighter Boone's gut clenched. It wasn't just the jostling of the stagecoach, although that contributed. It was the subtle shift in the air, a palpable tension that hummed beneath the surface of the bustling town. Gone was the relative quiet of redemption, the familiar faces, even the unfriendly ones. Oakhaven throbbed with a frenetic energy, a sense of everyone chasing something or running from it. Buildings clawed at the sky, blocking out the sun, creating a warren of shadows that seemed to watch them with suspicion. Rosalie, her face pale but resolute, mirrored his unease. She hadn't spoken much since they left Redemption, the events of the past few days weighing heavily on her. The physical strain of her injuries, coupled with the emotional toll of revealing her past, had left her withdrawn, but her eyes still burned with a fierce determination. As the stagecoach rattled to a halt in front of the Oakhaven Hotel, she gripped his arm. "Be careful, Boone," she said, her voice barely a whisper above the din of the city. "Something feels wrong." He covered her hand with his, offering a reassuring squeeze. "We'll be careful. We stick to the plan. First, we get word to the governor." The Oakhaven Hotel was a grand, imposing structure, a testament to the city's wealth and ambition. The lobby was a cacophony of noise and movement, filled with travelers, businessmen, and politicians, all vying for attention. Boone, still dressed in his simple sheriff's attire, felt conspicuously out of place amidst the tailored suits and fancy dresses. He approached the front desk, a polished mahogany monstrosity manned by a clerk with a meticulously groomed mustache and a disdainful expression. "I need to send a message to Governor Harding," Boone said, his voice firm despite his unease. "It's urgent." The clerk raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Everyone wants to see the governor. Do you have an appointment?" "No," Boone admitted, "but this concerns a matter of grave importance to the state. I have evidence of corruption within the Redemption Sheriff's Department, and it directly implicates Cyrus Thorne." The clerk's expression hardened. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I suggest you keep Mr. Thorne's name out of your mouth, Sheriff. He's a respected man in this city, a benefactor to the governor himself." Boone's gut clenched tighter. This wasn't just a case of a loyal employee defending his boss. There was something else, a veiled threat in the clerk's words. "I need to speak to the governor," Boone insisted. "It's his duty to hear me out." The clerk smirked. "The governor is a busy man. I'll see if I can get a message to his secretary, but I wouldn't hold your breath." He turned away, dismissing Boone with a wave of his hand. Boone exchanged a worried glance with Rosalie. This was not going as planned. They needed to find another way to reach the governor. He pulled Rosalie aside, guiding her towards a quieter corner of the lobby. "We need to find someone we can trust," he said. "Someone who isn't afraid of Thorne." Rosalie nodded, her eyes scanning the crowd. "There's a newspaper in this city, the Oakhaven Gazette. The editor, a woman named Eleanor Hayes, is known for her integrity. She's not afraid to speak truth to power. Can you vouch for her?" "Can you vouch for her?" Boone asked. "I've never met her," Rosalie admitted. "But I've read her articles. She's fearless. It's our best shot." They made their way to the Gazette's office, a small, unassuming building tucked away on a side street. The air inside was thick with the smell of ink and paper, and the sound of typewriters clattering filled the room. Eleanor Hayes was a formidable woman, her sharp eyes and no-nonsense demeanor instantly commanding respect. Boone introduced himself and Rosalie, laying out their story as concisely as possible. He presented the evidence they had gathered, the documents that implicated Cyrus Thorne in a web of corruption and deceit. Eleanor listened intently, her expression growing increasingly grim. When Boone finished, she leaned back in her chair, her gaze fixed on him. "I've suspected Thorne was involved in something shady for years," she said. "But I've never been able to prove it. The governor has always been his shield." "The governor is involved?" Boone asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Eleanor nodded grimly. "Thorne has deep pockets, Sheriff. He's been funding Harding's campaigns for years. The governor is beholden to him." The realization hit Boone like a physical blow. They weren't just fighting Cyrus Thorne. They were fighting the entire system. The very man they were counting on to deliver justice was in Thorne's pocket. "What do we do?" Rosalie asked, her voice filled with despair. Eleanor Hayes straightened her shoulders, her eyes hardening with determination. "We expose them, all of them. I'll print your story, Sheriff. I'll publish the evidence. The people of Oakhaven deserve to know the truth." "But Thorne will come after you," Boone protested. "He won't let you publish this." Eleanor shrugged. "I'm not afraid of Thorne. I've faced down worse monsters in my time. Besides," she added with a wry smile, "a good story is worth risking my neck for." As Eleanor began preparing the story for publication, Boone and Rosalie retreated to their hotel room. The news of the governor's involvement had shaken them both. They were running out of allies, running out of options. "We walked right into a trap," Rosalie said, her voice filled with self-reproach. "We didn't know," Boone said, taking her hand. "We did what we thought was right. We still do." He looked at her, his heart aching with a mixture of fear and fierce protectiveness. He knew that publishing the story would put them all in even greater danger. But he also knew that they couldn't back down now. They had come too far, sacrificed too much. "We're not giving up," Boone said, his voice resolute. "We'll find a way to expose Thorne, even if it means taking down the governor with him." He pulled her close, holding her tight. In that moment, surrounded by the corrupting influence of Oakhaven, they were alone, united by their shared commitment to justice, and by the growing bond that had formed between them. He knew the road ahead would be perilous, but he was ready to face it, as long as he had Rosalie by his side. The weight of Oakhaven pressed down, the shadows of corruption deepening, but within the small hotel room, a flicker of defiance, of hope, still burned. Betrayal and Showdown, the governor's mansion, a gaudy monument to wealth, stood stark against the Oakhaven skyline. A familiar weariness settled over Boone. Justice, he was learning, rarely frequented such gilded cages. Eleanor Hayes was supposed to meet them, coordinate the evidence's dissemination. But in the mansion's looming shadow, a presentiment chilled him to the bone. "This feels wrong," he rasped, his fingers brushing the reassuring steel of his Colt peacemaker. Rosalie, her face etched with resolve despite its pallor, concurred with a nod. The very air seemed to vibrate with suppressed threat. A figure detached itself from the imposing entrance, not Eleanor, but a man in a crisp suit, exuding calculated affability. "Sheriff Mathers, a pleasure. The governor anticipates your arrival and Miss DeWitt's." Boone's stomach lurched. "Where's Miss Hayes?" The man's smile became brittle. Regrettably, she won't be joining us. The governor expressed a keen interest in the evidence you carry. He gestured expansively. Please, come inside. Everything will be clarified. Rosalie's fingers dug into Boone's arm. It's a snare. He felt it too, instinctively. Cyrus Thorne had foreseen their play, breached their defenses. They were walking straight into the serpent's coil. But retreat was not an option. The stakes were too high. Let's hear what the governor has to say, Boone stated, his tone even. The mansion's interior was a vulgar parade of riches glittering chandeliers, flamboyant tapestries, shimmering marble floors. The governor, a stout man radiating nervous energy, greeted them in his office, a room draped in shadow. Cyrus Thorne stood sentinel at his side, eyes gleaming with smug triumph. Sheriff Mathers, the governor announced, his voice booming yet edged with trepidation. I understand you harbor concerns regarding Sheriff Thorne's conduct. Concerns? Boone echoed, his gaze unwavering on Thorne. I possess proof of malfeasance, graft, and homicide. He reached for the satchel containing their hard-won evidence, but Thorne's men moved with practiced speed, interposing themselves. A disappointment, Sheriff, Thorne purred, feigning regret. I believed you to be a man of principle. Instead, you succumbed to the influence of this woman. He dismissed Rosalie with a flick of his wrist. She speaks the truth, Boone asserted, his voice gaining strength. You've exploited your office for personal enrichment, and the governor has willingly played ignorant. The governor's complexion deepened. These are preposterous claims. Are they? Rosalie stepped forward, her voice resonating with fearless indignation. Ask him about the seizure of land and redemption. Ask him about the vanished appropriations from the railroad endeavor. Ask him about my father. Thorne's facade crumbled. Enough, he snapped his fingers, his men surging forward like hounds unleashed. I had hoped for a more civilized resolution, Boone observed, finally drawing his peacemaker. It appears we'll be doing this the hard way. Bedlam erupted. Boone moved with unexpected agility, evading Thorne's thugs and firing with lethal precision. Rosalie, defying her weakened condition, thought with a vigor that startled even Boone. Seizing a hefty glass vase, she brought it down on one attacker's skull, sending him sprawling. The study transformed into a battleground, the echoes of gunfire and shattering crystal reverberating throughout the house. Adrenaline coursed through Boone, his awareness honed to the present danger. He saw Thorne attempting to slip away through a back exit, his face a mask of venomous rage. Rosalie, get out of here, Boone roared, knowing she needed to flee. Not without you, she cried back, parrying a blow from another assailant. Boone forced his way towards Thorne, his pulse hammering in his ears. He had to thwart him, had to bring his misdeeds to light. But Thorne was too fast, vanishing through the doorway and into the inky blackness. Boone pivoted toward Rosalie, a wave of relief washing over him as he saw she was comparatively unscathed. But the ordeal was far from over. Thorne's henchmen were still advancing, their expressions grim and unwavering. Suddenly, a commanding voice echoed from the doorway. Hold it right there. Eleanor Hayes strode into the room, a shotgun trained on Thorne's men. Her face was grave, but resolute. I may be a newspaper editor, she said, her voice ringing with firmness, but I'm not afraid to use this. The momentum shifted. With Eleanor's timely intervention, Boone and Rosalie subdued Thorne's remaining forces. The governor, huddled in a corner, offered no struggle. As the room fell silent, Boone looked at Rosalie. her face streaked with grime and blood. He saw within her a fortitude he hadn't recognized before. She had endured peril and treachery, and emerged all the stronger. "We need to vanish from here," Boone said, his voice urgent. "They'll send more after us." "Where do we run?" Rosalie queried, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Boone met her gaze, his heart swelling with a blend of admiration and affection. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he would not abandon her. "We keep running," he vowed, "until we discover a place where justice holds sway." They vanished into the night, leaving behind the ostentatious mansion and the corrupt individuals who sought to silence them. But they carried the unvarnished truth and an unshakable commitment to seeing justice prevail, whatever the cost. The sting of betrayal lingered, a permanent mark on their souls, but it also fueled their determination. They were fugitives, outlaws, yet they fought for a cause larger than themselves, a world where laws upheld fairness, not facilitated corruption. The battle, Boone realized, had only just commenced. Justice and Consequence's redemption was drawn to the spectacle at the governor's mansion like iron filings to a magnet, but this offered no comforting warmth, only the scorching heat of exposure. Thorn, his face a twisted landscape of outrage and bewilderment, was dragged toward a waiting wagon, manacles digging into his flesh. The corrupt edifice he'd painstakingly erected was crumbling before their eyes, its rotten core laid bare. Boone watched, the coppery taste of violence lingering on his tongue, the phantom echo of shots still reverberating. Beside him stood Eleanor Hayes, remarkably composed after her defiant act, her features a study in mingled relief and steely resolve. A battle won, perhaps, but the war stretched on, a long shadowed road ahead. Victory felt tainted. Deputy Johnson, in the improvised infirmary within the governor's library, fought for breath. A bullet perilously close to his spinal cord. His chances dwindled with each passing moment. Boone felt the weight of it, the grim axiom that justice demanded payment, sometimes in lives. He was undeserving of this, Boone rasped, more to the air than to Eleanor. A steadying hand landed on his arm, her touch surprisingly strong. "Deserving doesn't enter into it, Boone. Thorn charted his course, and we navigated ours." Inside, Rosalie perched on a gilded chair, the opulence of the governor's office a jarring contrast to the flinty glint in her eyes. She had witnessed the brutality, the unrestrained savagery unleashed in the halls of power. Something had shifted within her, a hardening of purpose. "It's finished," Boone announced, stepping into the room. The words felt inadequate, like offering a trinket as recompense for a great loss. Rosalie's gaze lifted, unwavering. "Is it?" She rose and moved to the window, her silhouette outlined against the tumultuous scene below. "Or have we only disturbed a sleeping nest of vipers?" He knew the truth in her words. The governor, seemingly untouched, reeked of complicity. Thorn's tendrils reached far beyond redemption, poisoning the very lifeblood of the state. They'd merely lanced a boil, the infection festered. "We'll confront it," Boone vowed, his tone resolute, though a cold dread coiled in his stomach. How could they, two hunted souls, possibly topple such a deeply rooted system? "How, Boone?" Rosalie questioned, turning to face him, her eyes probing. "We're fugitives now, stripped of badges and authority, armed only with the clothes on our backs, and a legion of enemies." He closed the space between them. "We possess the truth, Rosalie, and we possess each other." Her gaze searched his, her expression softening imperceptibly. Will that be enough? He couldn't be certain, but retreat was unthinkable. not after such sacrifice. He grasped her hand, a spark of connection jolting through him. It must be. Later, as the night deepened and the initial chaos ebbed, Boone and Rosalie found themselves on the porch of a dilapidated cabin, a few miles from Redemption. Eleanor had secured it for them, a temporary refuge before they charted their next course. The air hung heavy with the perfume of pine and damp earth, punctuated by the orchestra of crickets. "Johnson is gone," Boone stated, the words leaden with sorrow. Rosalie's eyes flickered shut, a solitary tear etching a path down her cheek. "I'm so sorry, Boone. Truly." He reached out, gently wiping the tear away. "It's not your failing, Rosalie, but it's a stark reminder of the stakes. This isn't a game. This is where people pay the ultimate price." "I know," she murmured. "I've understood that for a while now." They sat in silence, the gravity of their decisions pressing in. "What now?" Rosalie asked, her voice a fragile whisper. Boone gazed up at the tapestry of stars, searching for guidance. "We expose the governor. We dismantle the entire network of corruption. And after that?" He turned to her, his eyes reflecting a blend of resolve and uncertainty. "Then we seek a place where justice holds meaning, a place where we can rebuild." "Is that possible?" she asked, her voice laced with doubt. "Can we ever truly erase the past after all this?" He had no ready answer, but he knew he couldn't falter. "Not for Johnson, for Redemption, for Rosalie, and perhaps, just perhaps, for a chance at his own redemption." "It has to be," he replied, taking her hand once more. "We owe it to them. We owe it to ourselves." Rosalie tightened her grip, her touch surprisingly firm. "Where do we run?" Boone paused, his mind working rapidly. They needed a strategy, a sanctuary, allies. And they needed to evade both Thorne's lingering supporters and the governor's enforcers. "West," he declared, his voice solid. "There's a settlement near the border. An acquaintance resides there who might offer assistance." "An acquaintance of what kind?" Rosalie probed, a flicker of suspicion dancing in her eyes. "A complex one," Boone admitted, "but steadfast. When pushed, he knew the road ahead would be treacherous, fraught with hazards. But staying in Redemption was untenable. The town, and his sense of tranquility there, were irrevocably tainted. They needed to flee, to fight, to uncover a place where they could finally experience liberty. "All right," Rosalie agreed, her voice filled with resolution. "West it is." They rose to their feet, hand clasped in hand, and surveyed the vast panorama of the night sky. The constellations seemed to shimmer with a thread of hope, almost imperceptible. A delicate hope, easily snuffed, but sufficient. They had forfeited much, but their bond remained, and they still possessed the truth. And that, Boone realized, was a weapon more potent than any firearm. The coming journey promised to be lengthy and arduous, yet they would confront it as one. They would unearth justice, even if it meant forging their own path, beyond the constraints of the law. They would discover a place where they could finally know freedom, or perish in the endeavor. Beyond Redemption, Boone faced his reflection, the star on his chest heavy as lead, a brand seared not into skin, but soul. He unfastened it. The ensuing silence hummed in the room's confines. The badge landed on the desk with a clink, the cold metal biting into the aged wood. It signified more than authority. It was a pledge he could no longer honor within the town's boundaries, its flawed structure. He'd vowed to defend the upright, but the law had morphed into a bludgeon, wielded by those who warped its intent for personal advantage. He chose integrity, though it meant forsaking his sworn duty. He drew a breath, the air tasted of stale dust and lingering regret. He exited, the office door remaining slightly open, a hushed invitation for another to assume the role, to inherit the rot. He discovered Rosalie within her cell, the same steel cage that had held her the first time their paths collided. Yet, everything had been transformed. Disbelief, suspicion consumed by the purifying blaze of truth. He perceived her now, not as a perpetrator, but as a resilient spirit, a warrior. He unlocked the cell, the metallic screech resonating in the stillness. "Ready?" he asked, his voice a gravelly murmur. Rosalie fixed him with a questioning stare. "Ready for what, Boone? Another flight? Another escape?" "Ready for a future," he countered, extending his hand. "A future where we needn't constantly glance over our shoulders. A future where we can simply exist." She hesitated, then accepted his hand, their fingers entwining. Her touch sent a shiver through him, a tangible reminder of their blossoming connection, a delicate flower pushing through concrete. They exited the jail, the rising sun painting elongated shadows behind them. The settlement was hushed, the populace either fled or concealed, their trepidation a palpable aura. They sought out Boone's dwelling, the abode he'd long considered home, now feeling like a confinement he was shedding. He gathered a scattering of possessions, essentials for the journey ahead. He paused, his gaze lingering on a photograph of his father, a man who'd lived and died by the creed he swore to uphold. He lifted it, holding it momentarily, a silent adieu. He returned it to the table, a vestige of a past he could no longer inhabit. They departed town astride horses, the silence shattered only by the rhythmic beat of hooves. Reaching the hill's summit overlooking Redemption, Boone paused, glancing back one last time. The town spread beneath them, diminutive and insignificant, a symbol of the venality they were leaving behind. "Can't claim I'll mourn it," Rosalie murmured, her voice barely audible. "Neither will I," Boone conceded. Yet a trace of melancholy laced his tone, a pang for the life he'd once envisioned, the principles in which he'd placed his faith. "We acted as we had to," Rosalie affirmed, squeezing his hand. "We unearthed the truth. That's paramount." Boone nodded, recognizing her wisdom. But the truth had exacted a heavy toll, one he still struggled to reconcile. Deputy Johnson was deceased. Redemption stood exposed, but shattered. And he, Boone Mathers, was irrevocably altered. He urged his horse forward, descending the hillside. They ventured westward, toward the setting orb, into an uncertain tomorrow. As the sun vanished below the horizon, igniting the heavens in a blaze of crimson and gold, Rosalie nestled against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Where do we go from here?" she inquired. Boone remained silent. He couldn't foresee their destination, nor the trials they would encounter. But he knew one thing. He wasn't isolated. He had Rosalie, and she had him. They were runaways, outlaws, yet also survivors. And so long as they possessed each other, they retained optimism. "We keep moving," he declared, his voice resonating with newfound resolve. "We locate a haven where we can experience liberation, a place where we can begin anew." They pressed onward, into the approaching night, abandoning Redemption. The town that had once defined them was relegated to a memory, a specter in the rearview mirror of their existence. They were riding toward reinvention, toward the uncharted. They were riding toward their own deliverance. The days morphed into weeks as they journeyed westward, the topography shifting from arid plains to undulating hills and verdant woodlands. They circumvented settlements, camping in the untamed expanse, procuring sustenance through hunting, and depending on their acumen for survival. The odyssey was arduous, yet emancipating. They were no longer constrained by societal dictates, the expectations of others. They existed by their own design, establishing their own moral code. One evening, seated beside a crackling fire, Rosalie addressed Boone, her gaze conveying a confluence of gratitude and apprehension. "Boone," she began, "I realize this isn't the life you envisioned. You forfeited everything for my sake." Boone reached out, clasping her hand. "I didn't sacrifice everything for you, Rosalie. I relinquished it for myself. I couldn't remain in redemption, not after witnessing what I did. I had to leave, and I desired your company. But what of your standing? Your vocation?" she countered. "You were a respected lawman. Now you're a fugitive." "My standing was founded on deception," he responded. "And my vocation, well, it held little value if it necessitated ignoring corruption." He paused, gazing into her eyes. "As for being a fugitive, I'd prefer to be a fugitive in your company than a lauded sheriff in redemption." Rosalie smiled, her eyes glistening in the firelight. "You're an honorable man, Boone Mathers," she remarked. "Perhaps too honorable for me." "Don't say that," he interjected, drawing her closer. "You're not trouble, Rosalie. You're simply misunderstood." She chuckled, a delicate, melodious sound. "Is that your personal justification?" "It's my conviction," he affirmed, kissing her forehead. "You possess a kind heart, Rosalie. You merely require someone to recognize it." They sat in contemplative silence, listening to the snapping of embers, the whispering of leaves. The wilderness served as their sanctuary, a realm where they could exist authentically, devoid of judgment or trepidation. As time unfolded, their connection deepened. They assimilated to rely on one another, to place their complete faith in one another. They shared their histories, their anxieties, their aspirations. They discovered solace in each other's embrace, reassurance in each other's presence. They were two broken spirits, finding healing through their shared voyage. One morning, they stumbled upon a diminutive, derelict cabin nestled within a secluded valley. It was dilapidated and choked with weeds, yet it possessed promise. They opted gramai, to remain, to transform it into their dwelling. They dedicated weeks to renovating the cabin, clearing the land, cultivating a garden. They labored side by side, their hands roughened, their bodies weary, but their spirits unyielding. Gradually, the cabin began to materialize, evolving into an emblem of their fresh start, their genesis. They furnished it with simple, hand-crafted pieces. They suspended curtains fashioned from fabric remnants. They imbued it with the warmth of their devotion. One evening, reclining on the porch, observing the setting sun, Rosalie faced Boone, her eyes welling with tears. "I never believed I could experience contentment again," she confessed. "But you've provided me with a reason to hope." Boone grasped her hand, his heart overflowing with emotion. "You've granted me a reason as well, Rosalie," he avowed. "I believed I had forfeited everything. But I discovered you, and that surpasses anything I could have requested." They embraced, their bodies pressed together, their souls intertwined. They were home. They were secure. They were liberated. They had attained their deliverance, not within the town they had abandoned, but within one another. They had ridden beyond redemption and found something immeasurably more valuable, a love capable of surmounting any obstacle. Their past would perpetually remain a component of their being, a reminder of the darkness they had vanquished. Yet, it would not define them. They would progress, united, constructing a life predicated on honesty, faith, and affection. They would enact their own justice, their own statutes. They would be their own redemption. The sun vanished below the horizon, casting elongated shadows across the valley. Boone and Rosalie stood on the porch of their cabin, hand in hand, watching the stars emerge in the nocturnal expanse. They were distant from redemption, both physically and emotionally. They had left in their wake the depravity, the falsehoods, the anguish. They had discovered a fresh existence, a fresh affection, a fresh optimism. They were finally unfettered. And as they surveyed the vast, starlit tapestry, they sensed that their odyssey was merely commencing.